Today's topic is Storyworlding, Extraordinary Feminist Methodologies. Well, several weeks ago, I actually consulted Dr. Cullen on what topic about feminist methodology the audience of the Mosaic Network might be interested in. And we later decided an overview of feminist methodology and its relevance to literacy studies. I think it's a great choice. As some of you might know, I just finished teaching my first feminist methodology course last semester. So I was super excited that I had the opportunity to do that. Although I have been working on feminist projects and writing about it for several years, last semester really is the first time for me to systematically teaching this topic. Its history, central ideas, persistent tensions, and promising future directions. So I would like to take this moment to take this opportunity to share with you not only some examples from my research, but also a few teaching moments that make me pause and think. Well, at the beginning of this talk, I would like to pose this question for us to think together. Oh, this is an overview, by the way, of today's talk. And we will start with this overview of feminist methodology. And then I will share my reflection from teaching and research. And then I will briefly talk about its relevance to literacy studies. And now let's see. Yeah, now let's take a look at this question. So what makes a feminist study, or what constitutes feminist social and educational research? I'm not sure how much all of you have been exposed to this term or to the general idea of research methodology. I think what we can do maybe is to take 1 or 2 minutes to just, think about this question. And I invite you, if you would like to, share your answers in the chat box. So I will be temporarily stop sharing my PowerPoint slides so that I can see the content in the chat box. Right, I see people have been sharing some thoughts. Yeah, so we have opinions about, we need to engage female research participants and research for, by, and on women. And we have more broader answer about caring for marginalized people, methods that aim to be equitable for all. Wonderful. In post-qualitative methodologies. Amazing. Possibility for co-creation, ethics of care, nuanced perceptions of vulnerability. Its commitment to inclusivity, reflexivity, and disruption of power hierarchies with knowledge production. Focusing on lived experience of women and the exploring the multi-layer oppression systems. To insist that men are gendered too. Amazing. Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing. And we have one more. Disrupting inequitable power structures, hierarchies in research, participatory approach. Is it synonymous to gender studies? Interesting. Well, it's really wonderful to see that people have already been very actively thinking about this question, and we have like answers from very different aspects of this methodology. So what I will do is I will restart my share of my the share of my screen, and then I will share some answers from a feminist methodology, the feminist methodology class I taught last semester. So like some of you, one of my students proposed that, when we talked about this question, which is one of the first few questions we discussed in this class, and one of my students proposed that feminist studies should include women as the research participants. They should be studies that involve women. And we've seen a similar answer in the chat box as well. So another suggested that the research topic of study should focus on gender equity and justice. That is, feminist studies aim to interrogate the permissive gender inequality and uneven power relationship of different genders. Unlike many objectivist studies that claim to be value neutral, or doing research is to objectively describe what is out there external to us. These studies have a mission of transforming the existing power relationship and just society. And a third opinion emerged as some other students contend that feminist studies should use feminism as our analytic perspectives. Feminism then is the lens for us to approach the social phenomena we study. Well, the last one is that so what is important in feminist study is the values we adhere to in research. If our research centers issues, voices, and lived experience of women. Well, I found this question seems to be straightforward, but in reality is worth to engage more. For instance, most of us might have encountered self-claimed feminist studies, and we might tend to take for granted this term. And now if we take a closer look at what these different ideas that my students shared last fall, and some of the results from like the answers from our brainstorm just now, we may realize that there are so many more questions we need to further discuss based on what we have here. For example, some of the questions we can continue to ask who are the women when we talk about, feminist studies should involve women. And what are their issues? Are these issues unique for women? What is a lens? So we know that a lens or analytic lens is basically a metaphor to sensitize the theorization and conceptualization process. But what is the implication of using a metaphor here to talk about the process of conceptualization? And most importantly, when we talk about feminism, are we talking about feminism or feminisms in its plural form? Before moving ahead to address them, I want to acknowledge that this question is, of course, not new. Renowned feminist philosopher Sandra Harding, for example, wrote a widely cited piece on this topic titled, "Is There a Feminist Method?" Written in almost 4 decades ago, Harding made a point to argue against the idea of a distinctive feminist method of research. Well, here I list table of some of the key terms that Harding used in her article, and I'm sure some of you might be familiar with these terms, such as epistemology, methodology, and methods. I'm not going to go into the details to explain them, but in Harding's argument, she first excludes the possibility of making a judgment of whether a study is a feminist study or not based on the method that it uses. So for her, there is a need to distinguish these three terms: method, methodology, and epistemology. She argues that we often conflate these three terms together, whereas to clarify the question, one needs to first clarify or clearly demarcate the meanings and realms of these three terms. So, for example, epistemology is a theory of knowledge, whereas methodology for Harding is defined as a theory and analysis of how research does or should proceed. And compared with epistemology, which is also often discussed in a more abstract and broad context, methodology is often situated specifically in this context of social and how to justify the knowledge production in this context. Whereas method for Harding is this technique for or a way of proceeding in gathering evidence. So method really focuses on this how level, on the level of practice. So in other words, for Harding, the differences between feminist studies and other types of social research do not lie in how they use methods, but how feminist researchers justify their methodology and ground their approach in epistemology. So here I made a table to compare my classroom discussion with Harding's approach. As you can see, Harding really anchors what are the distinctive features of feminist analysis and research on this methodological level. And she listed three different aspects. So in terms of the empirical and theoretical resources, women's experiences are considered as, the major resources. It is a major resources theoretically because feminist studies do not focus on the study of external world, the objectivist conceptualization of world. Instead, is this idea of looking at how world is experienced through the perspective and through the lived experience of women. It is the empirical resource because, just as what we discussed just now, women are considered as the main participants of the research. Feminist research should be done with women. And then we can see Harding also clearly defines the purpose of doing feminist research as, the research for women. And then she also discusses the role of researcher here. And it's important to locate the standpoint of the researcher and promote reflexivity. So after making this comparison, I realized that, three of the major points that my students and I discussed in our class actually fall into this category of empirical and theoretical resources, women's experience, And then the discussion about topic on gender and equity and justice aligns well with Harding's discussion of the purpose of feminist research. What is missing, though, in the classroom discussion is the role of researcher. So, do we need to, for example, clearly locate the standpoint of the researcher in feminist research? Now, this is getting very interesting. As we can see, Harding considers the key factors that distinguishes feminist studies from other types of social research primarily lie in the domain of methodology and grounded in epistemology. What I found is that this insight is very helpful and applicable in my own writing and supervision practice. For instance, it's common to see novice researchers, including my younger self, to mainly discuss the feminist approach at what Harding would consider the method level. What is equally common is the mixing together of methods, methodology, and epistemology. I think paying more intentional attention to the different layers of the argument will really help us build a strong justification for research methodology. So also I want to remind our I want to remind myself and of our audiences that Harding is known for her contribution to a specific type of feminist epistemology or philosophy, the standpoint series. Now, due to the time limitation, I'm not going to go into the details of standpoint theories. But what we can see is this is what the feminist philosophers like Harding argue against. So the positivist view of truth and reality. And in an oversimplified and very rough stroke fashion, I listed some of the tenets of positivist view of truth and reality. So here, as we can see, Harding's argue against this idea knowledge consists primarily of turning facts derived from observation into sciences organized according to this theories formulated as general laws. And the fundamental relationship of knower researcher to reality is essentially a passive or neutral one. So consisting primarily of observing facts or sensory data and then building up knowledge from these observed facts. Also, like the realm of subjective or internal experience and meaning is irrelevant to science unless it manifests itself in measurable, observable behavior that follows law-like regularities. And then there is this assumption about value neutrality. So these are the things that feminist scholars, theorists have been trying to debate or argue against. And then, but then there are still like questions, about this discussion. So why do we need to spend so much time on this older piece, for example, one that was written 30-something years ago? I'm sure there are, some of the statements that viewing from today's point of view that are outdated or needs to be updated. For me, there are at least still two reasons that we need to take a look at this older piece. First of all, is this classical piece has significantly impacted even today how we conceptualize feminist methodology. And then this piece serves also as a reference point for us to check where we are right now. So these are like a few thoughts I have about where we are right now with feminist research methodology. It's still quite common to see qualitative research textbooks start with Harding's framework or the ones with family resemblance to explain the relationship between methodology, and epistemology. Some methodologists would argue that epistemology alone, for example, is not sufficient to lay the philosophic foundation of qualitative inquiry. Sometimes it's still important to address ontological questions, questions like what constitutes the world. And the ontology and the epistemology of feminist research is often intertwined, just like the questions we raised just a few minutes ago about who are counted as women. And this question undoubtedly is at the very center of the literature of gender studies, for example. From my point of view, we should also attend to the missing part in this table, in the table that I created about Harding's argument. So one salient missing part, which was also mentioned in our discussion through the chat box, is this discussion of research ethics informed by feminist theories. Researchers have elaborated on the relevance of feminist ethical principles with research ethics. So most noticeably, the concepts of caring, love, sisterhood, solidarity, allyship have all been leveraged to discuss situated, contextualized research ethics, or the relationship between researcher and research participants. So rather than the procedural ethics that is usually addressed through the regulation of ethical review boards, situational ethics allows us to see how researchers can enact feminist stances in concrete research practice. Often we achieve this not through the application of universal principles, but through insights into the nuances of specific situations and relational connections with others. So feminist research also contributes to this legitimization of studying lived experience in social research. Of course, feminist scholars are not the first nor the only group of scholars who have advocated for the importance of studying lived experience. Phenomenological studies, interpretivist research, and research informed by critical theories also highlight the importance of lived experience. But feminist researchers' contribution is noteworthy here. Women's lived experience is not one additional way to look at the world, but very often the silenced and invisibilized ways of being and becoming that needs to be excavated. Through the excavation of the invisible experience, we can further question the power relationship that creates the silence and entails the invisibility. And then the last point is about the impact of reflexivity and positionality. So today, it almost becomes a standard practice for qualitative researchers to practice reflexivity through explicitly stating researchers' positionality or researchers' social cultural position. There are certainly issues related to this practice when it becomes almost like formulaic. But the idea that a researcher produces knowledge not from a omnipresent third-person observer position, rather than from a specific social and cultural position, is to a large degree popularized through feminist works. As we continue to engage qualitative research or critical qualitative research, we do need to grapple with the implications of this practice. So with that said, I think it might be helpful to propose tentatively a general framework to think about the feminist methodology. Here I created this chart or this work by myself, and I listed what I consider as some of the important components when we, enact feminist methodology in our practice. I incorporated some of Harding's ideas, also like the class discussion and some of the much more recent literature on this topic. I've also listed a few, sample questions under each of the domain. Most importantly, I think I do want to locate a researcher's reflexivity and positionality at this center. So it's still, for me, it's still vitally important how we could ground our feminist works in our own lived experience, ground in the reflexivity that we engaged in. Um, I'm not going to go through like all the sample questions I listed here, but this is just some of the tentative ideas that I would like to share with the audience, and I welcome comments and suggestions, even critiques in the Q&A session. So let me see. Yeah. But after this winding and abstract discussion, we certainly still have like many questions that are unresolved and require more deliberation. So I think in what follows, I want to focus on these two questions. One is how do we demonstrate this practice of reflexivity and the analysis of one's positionality? The other one is what is the relationship between methods and methodologies in today's feminist research practice? Is a method just a tool? Are we still using this instrumental view to look at our methods? So I think this is the questions that really make me think when I was preparing this talk and when I was teaching the feminist methodology course. Right. So what I would like to do is I would like to continue to unpack some of the my thoughts on these two questions, but I also want to provide examples from my empirical work. Both of the examples I provided are embedded in my work in the Feminist Research Collective and in the collaborative project, the Women We Love project. And if you still have the poster for today's session, I invite you to scan the QR code from the poster, and that will lead you to this online website, the landing page of the Women We Love project. So the Feminist Research Collective was founded in the fall of 2017 at Indiana University, Bloomington. And it was at that time like a group of women scholars came together to form this group, and after some like extensive conversations, we think some of the core principles of our work is to engage in activism to fight for gender equity and social justice. So activism is a part of this group's part of our group's central activities, and then to develop a shared collective feminist scholarship, and also to offer mutual support for members of personal growth. Today, I noticed that one of my IFRC colleagues, Dr. Pooja Saxena, is also here. So thank you, Pooja, for being here. And I really invite you to join me, especially in the Q&A session, to have more conversations with our audience today. So the major collective project that the FRC, the Feminist Research Collective, undertake together is this Women We Love project. And this is the landing page of the project if you scan the QR code. The Women We Love project utilizes GIS technology, geographic information system technology, to create an online digital story space using this app called Story Map. Each point, so here. So you can see this is the map of the world, and then each point marked on the map is linked to a woman who lives or has lived in this area. And when possible, we build multimodal narratives with our participants, including images, poems, music, and recipe, as well as texts. So the stories are brought together on a single landing page by working with women we love to tell their life stories, their ordinary stories. We are able to create this meaningful and to some degree extraordinary size of recognition, honor, and passion, which transgress national, generational, and patriarchal boundaries. Well, today, instead of introducing the whole project, I would like to talk about, first of all, how this project allows me to reflect on my own positionality as a transnational Chinese feminist researcher. I documented this process in this paper that I co-authored with another FRC member, Samantha Silberstein. Not waves, but ripples, rewarding and counterwording of intergenerational feminism. So I will just briefly explain what we wrote in this paper. So in this paper, I recalled like my experience of becoming a feminist researcher and a feminist activist. I recalled when first taking my feminist course in grad school in the United States, I was asked to contemplate on this question of what feminism means to me. A feminism presented as the waves of political movements occurring in the Western countries, such as France, UK, and the United States. Perplexed and disoriented, I did not know where to start. What do waves of feminism means to me, a self-identified heterosexual cisgender Chinese woman born in the 1980s when China was ushered into the reform and open era, and growing up in this economic boom of China's late socialist 1990s. As the only child in my family, I benefited from an unintentional consequence of China's one-child policy, which eliminated the possibility for me to compete with a male sibling for family resources. My upbringing also influenced my belief in the old-fashioned socialist slogan on gender equality, not equity, but equality. So the slogan is, women can hold half of the sky, 妇女能顶半边天. The challenge lies in the mismatch between the context in which feminism was presented in literature and that the way in which I was socialized into a gendered world. In other words, I could not see myself as a Chinese in the feminist narrative. Nor could I see myself as a woman in the historical account about China based on the nation-state system. So this is what I and Samantha termed as our wave trouble instead of gender trouble. the wave trouble that we experienced in really reflecting upon our positionality as feminist scholars and feminist activists. What we did, instead of looking at these connections, we look at our intergenerational stories of our own families. So in my families, in this Women We Love project, I did interviews with my grandma, but the stories are primarily focused on my great grandma's story. So here are some pictures from the up left is a picture of like the younger me, like when I was little, like in elementary school, and my grandma. And then this larger one on the right is the picture of my great grandma, who has passed away for more than 2 decades. Is her and her siblings. And then this is the picture of me in my field work in China. So what this story is about is a buried family story or intergenerational story that I gradually came to a realization through this interview process, through this process of storyworlding, through the process of writing my great grandma's life experience. What I focused in this writing is, I remember when I was very little, like about 5 and 6, there was this family puzzle in my family about my great grandma's heart disease. So my mom was a nurse in our local hospital. Like every year almost, once a while, my great grandma would suffer from her mysterious heart disease. And then they would rush her into my mom's hospital. And then my mom would take care of my great grandma and then did all the medical tests, but found nothing. Like they couldn't make even one diagnosis about what's going on with my great grandma's heart. Like, what is the issue about her heart disease? So my mom was very confused. My mom, like one thing she often talked about is this like perplexity she had. She would talk with me, even when I was 5, she would say things like, we test everything, but we just couldn't figure out. So I remember my first professional aspiration when I was 5 was to become a cardiologist, to really figure out what's going on with my great grandma's like heart disease. I really kept this aspiration for a long time, but it was until later when I started to do this interview with my grandma. And at that time, my great grandma has already passed away. So it was until at that time when I started to interview my grandma about her mom's story, I gradually realized what's going on with her. So my great grandma was a long-term domestic violence survivor. She had a very abusive husband. So for 20 something years, she stayed with that guy, and then over the all the turbulent years and all the suffering years, she developed this symptom of heart disease. It was actually a consequence of this long-term gender-based violence. At that time, like when I started to write my story, I realized that this is not something that a medical, like it was not a physical issue that medical procedure could solve. It was an issue about this gender-based violence that was so prevalent at that time in her generation. It was prevalent in my grandma's generation, and even my aunt also suffered from that. So I never became a cardiologist, but instead I became a feminist. In the story I shared in this article, I talked about how the very winding and long healing process was made possible by my grandma and by my mom, how this intergenerational women's efforts have made me a feminist scholar. Instead of looking at the waves, the political movements that I was not part of, I tended to, the ripples, the small ripples in my own family. And it's there that I think I finally found my position. So I want to share this very small piece in this collective project, just to demonstrate. After writing this piece, I have been thinking a lot about, what does it mean for us to really develop our reflexivity through understanding our position. I think for me, this is really not about to grapple with the identity markers imposed by the society. For me, like a person who is like a marginalized and transnational scholar, is really to think about, my lived experience and how this lived experience allows me to talk back against those major texts, for example. So this is one of the cases that I would like to share. So then another one is this is based on another article I published, this time with another FRC member, Barbara Dennis. So in this article, we talked about the overall research methodology of the Women We Love project. We call it Storyworlding, and outline of the philosophic commitments and the research applications of a new feminist methodology. But what I would like to do is, instead of discussing this overview of the methodology, I want to focus on one method, the method of mapping. So I want to think more deeply about the relationship between the method and the methodology, because I think there is this tendency in Harding's work, but also in our other writings, to instrumentalize our method. But maybe there is this methodological possibility for us to think about methodology, and all these terms that make us a mouthful more organically. For example, in this case of mapping, and maybe you have already aware, is at the very center of this Women We Love project, because the choice of using GIS technology, the choice of locating women's lived experience on this global map. So this is related with this idea of how do we study spatiality in feminist studies. And first of all, we want to make the distinction between space and place. So the distinction, basically, we could also map it on what we just discussed about this objectivist view of reality, and this view of reality as experienced through, or reality as experienced through women, the perspective of women. So space in literature, in many methodological literature, is defined as an abstract, this scientific, mathematical, or measurable conception, whereas place is the elaborated cultural meanings people invest in and attach it to a specific site or local. Whereas, so you could see, place as a concept would be aligned better with, would be aligned well with feminist methodology used in the Women with Love projects. And in some way, this is connected to, the case of mapping. So when we think about mapping, for example, is one of the methods that could be used to study space or place. But as a method, mapping is not it's not innocent of all of these theoretical assumptions. For example, if we look at the historical how mapping or how maps are historically constructed, we realize that mapping is often built on this bird's eye view of the space and claim to be objective. And mapping in many cases reflects state ideology or this top-down control of state's intention of control of the population. Whereas in the Storyworlding, in this Women with Love project, what we did is to turn this concept and to turn this method on its head. So we use this idea of participatory counter mapping, meaning we want to look at and understand places through the experience and eyes of women. And in this case, so it focuses on grassroots experience, it's bottom up instead of top down, and is situated within this socially constructed perspective, acknowledging that, there is no such a thing as essentialized feminist or women's perspective. Their perspectives are really like situated and socially and culturally constructed. So I guess these are the other example I would like to share. And by sharing that, I think one thing I want to highlight is I like this is my tentative thought, and I'm very open for engagement and questions and critiques. But I do feel like we such a clear cut between methods and methodology and epistemology, and to think about those just like a buffet style of like choosing different methods may actually not work in today's research practice. So we may want to think more organically about what it means to enact even a method, not only as a tool, but as something that is also historically constructed. At the end, I just want to maybe briefly touch on some of the points about how feminist methodology could be connected with literacy studies. I also want to acknowledge that I'm not an expert in this field, so I just did some very tentative and preliminary exploration. One thing I want to first of all point out is I think there is this a large space and a lot of potential to apply feminist methodologies into literacy studies. And then in this application process or in this process of enactment, what I view as the crucial thing is this to look at this theoretical congruence and alignment. For example, how the theoretical framework of the substantive topic aligns and is congruent with the methodological choices that we make. And then I also want to point out this what I view as a particular strength of feminist methodologies is this exploration of voice, what that means, what entails, or what silences, marginalized populations or social groups' voice. And this might be connected with the studies of authorial voices in literacy studies. So one thing I have been grappling with personally recently is, this very interesting question of what is the positionality of the writings by artificial intelligence. So nowadays, I know in, for example, writing literature or in writing research, scholars have been explore how to incorporate, say, ChatGPT in writing education. But what is the positionality of, those writings generated by artificial intelligence? I found this is still a very open-ended question, and what that means to have those writings circulated in our society that is not founded in a very situated location. So the third point I want to talk about is this idea of, I think there is a particular affinity between feminist methodologies and the very gendered literacy practice, the interrogation of power structure and the reproduction of inequality. For example, I know in literacy studies, there is a long tradition to explore, say, parenting, family literacy practice, and the differences of like social classes. In the context that I'm more familiar with, say in contemporary China, there is some burgeoning studies on the gendered perspective of literacy practice, which I think really have been informative. And then the last point, I think is more more specific because it is specifically about data literacy and information literacy. The today's feminist methodology literature has been really like thriving, and maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, if you talk about feminist methodology, people may think this is a methodology for qualitative studies, but it's not the case anymore today. For example, this very interesting approach to data, critical data studies, and the idea of data feminism, I see a lot of like potential to connect that with the discussion of data literacy and information literacy. I will just, with that, I will just end my talk here. And I want to also finally acknowledging, this, what I put in the title of this talk, this very interesting tension between ordinary and extraordinary feminist methodologies. By really investing ourselves in the ordinary world, I think we can find something extraordinary. Thank you all.